The CEO dismissed her when she tried to save him, until he discovered she spoke fluent Russian, and what she said left him in shock. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're watching from and rate this story 1 to 10. Enjoy the story. The morning fog rolled gently over Balboa Park as Elena Kovalenko stepped off the bus at the corner of Park Boulevard and President's Way. The salty breeze from the Pacific Ocean mixed with the scent of eucalyptus trees, creating that distinctive San Diego morning atmosphere that still felt magical to her, even after 6 months in America. She clutched her worn leather messenger bag closer to her chest, the same bag that had traveled with her from Kyiv to this new world of endless possibilities. At 26, Elena possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that radiated from her green eyes, inherited from her grandmother who used to tell her stories about the sunflower fields of Ukraine. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard navy blue uniform of Clean Tech Services, with a dignity that somehow made it look almost elegant. What people didn't know was that beneath that uniform beat the heart of a woman who had graduated summa cum laude in business administration from Kiev National Economic University. As she walked through the park's main promenade, passing the iconic California building with its ornate Spanish colonial revival architecture, Elena couldn't help but smile at the joggers and dog walkers beginning their day. In Ukraine, she had dreamed of America as a land where education and hard work guaranteed success. The reality had been more complicated. "Good morning, sunshine," called out Marcus, the security guard at TechWave Corporation, as Elena approached the gleaming 30-story glass tower that housed one of San Diego's most innovative technology companies. The building stood proudly in the heart of downtown, its reflective surface catching the early morning light like a beacon of modern American enterprise. "Good morning, Marcus," Elena replied with her slight accent that made even the simplest words sound melodic. "How is your daughter doing with her college applications?" Marcus beamed. Unlike most people in the building, he had taken the time to actually get to know Elena beyond her job title. "She got accepted to UC San Diego. Thanks for helping her with that essay about overcoming challenges. You sure know your way around words for someone who—" He paused, realizing he was about to say, "for someone who cleans toilets." "For someone who speaks English as a second language." Elena finished with a gentle laugh. "It's okay, Marcus, I know what you meant." The truth was, Elena spoke 4 languages fluently: Ukrainian, Russian, English, and Polish. But in America, it seemed that speaking multiple languages was less impressive when you were wearing a cleaning uniform. As she entered the marble-floored lobby, Elena marveled, as she did every morning, at the contemporary art installations and the massive digital display showcasing TechWave's latest innovations in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. The company had been founded 15 years ago by Daniel Mitchell, whose vision had transformed a small startup into a billion-dollar corporation that employed over 3,000 people across the United States. Elena had researched the company extensively before starting work there, old habits from her business school days. She knew their market share, their competitors, their financial performance, and their strategic partnerships. She knew that TechWave was currently negotiating a massive deal with international partners that could either catapult them to new heights or, if something went wrong, potentially devastate their market position. What she didn't know was that today, her knowledge of Russian would change everything. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Elena stepped inside, pressing the button for the 15th floor where the executive offices were located. She always started her day cleaning the upper floors when they were still relatively empty, finding a strange peace in the morning solitude and the panoramic views of San Diego Bay. As the elevator hummed upward, Elena thought about her small studio apartment in Hillcrest, where she spent her evenings applying for business positions and receiving polite rejection emails. "We were impressed with your qualifications, but we've decided to go with a candidate whose experience more closely matches our needs." The subtext was always clear. We need someone who sounds more American. The elevator stopped at the 28th floor, and Elena's quiet morning routine was about to take an unexpected turn. 2 men in expensive suits entered, speaking in animated Russian. They were so absorbed in their conversation that they barely acknowledged Elena, clearly assuming that the woman in the cleaning uniform couldn't possibly understand their language. "The fool has no idea what's coming," said the taller man with graying temples, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Mitchell thinks he's getting the deal of a lifetime." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Daniel Mitchell. That was TechWave's CEO. "The offshore accounts are ready," replied the shorter man, nervously adjusting his gold watch. "Once we get the technology transfer and the initial payment, we disappear. His company will be left with worthless code and empty promises." Elena's hands tightened around her cleaning supplies. Every word they spoke was in perfect Russian, and every word was describing what sounded like an elaborate fraud targeting her employer. "How much are we talking about?" the tall man asked with a smirk. "Initial transfer of $80 million, plus the proprietary AI algorithms that took his team 5 years to develop. By the time he realizes the revolutionary breakthrough we're selling him is garbage, we'll be enjoying retirement in the Cayman Islands." The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 30th floor, the executive level. The two men straightened their ties and switched to accented English. "Remember," the tall man said, "we are legitimate businessmen from Moscow with a genuine interest in long-term partnership." As they exited, Elena stood frozen in the elevator, her mind racing. She had just overheard the details of what appeared to be a massive fraud targeting TechWave Corporation. The company where she worked, the company whose financial reports she had studied, the company that employed thousands of people who trusted their leadership to make wise decisions. The elevator doors began to close, but Elena quickly pressed the button to hold them open. Through the glass walls of the executive floor, she could see the two men being greeted by Daniel Mitchell himself. Daniel Mitchell was exactly what Elena had expected from the business magazines, tall, confident, with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of success. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit was clearly custom-tailored, and his smile was the practiced warmth of someone who had spent years convincing investors to trust him with their money. Elena had seen him in the building before, always surrounded by assistants and executives, always moving with the purposeful stride of someone whose time was worth thousands of dollars per hour. He had never noticed her, of course. To him, she was part of the invisible army of people who kept his building clean and functional. But now Elena realized she might be the only person in the building who could save his company from financial ruin. The question was, would he listen to a cleaning lady who claimed to speak Russian? As the elevator doors finally closed and began descending toward the 15th floor, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to find a way to warn Daniel Mitchell, even if it meant risking her job and her dignity. After all, she hadn't traveled 5,000 miles from Ukraine just to stand by and watch injustice unfold in her new home. The morning fog was beginning to lift over San Diego, but inside TechWave Corporation, a storm was just beginning to brew. Elena spent the next 2 hours cleaning the 15th floor in a state of nervous energy that made her hands shake as she polished the conference room tables. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the San Diego harbor with its distinctive Coronado Bridge stretching gracefully across the bay, but her mind was entirely focused on the conversation she had overheard. Every few minutes, she glanced up at the digital clock on the wall. 10:47 a.m. The meeting between Daniel Mitchell and the Russian businessmen was still happening 30 floors above her head. How long did she have before they signed whatever fraudulent contract those men were proposing? "Elena, honey, you're going to wear a hole in that table if you keep polishing it like that," chuckled Rosa Martinez, the head of the cleaning staff. Rosa had been working at TechWave for 12 years and had taken Elena under her wing from day one, treating her with the motherly warmth that made Elena's homesickness a little more bearable. "Rosa," Elena said, setting down her microfiber cloth, "if you knew something terrible was about to happen to the company, something that could hurt a lot of people, what would you do?" Rosa raised an eyebrow and sat down in one of the ergonomic chairs that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. "That's a heavy question for a Tuesday morning, Mika. What's going on?" Elena hesitated. Rosa was kind, but she was also practical. Would she believe such an incredible story? "Hypothetically speaking," Elena said carefully, If someone overheard important information that could save the company money, a lot of money, but that person was just a cleaning lady, how would they get anyone to listen? Hypothetically, Rosa grinned, clearly not buying the hypothetical nature of the question. I'd say that person should march up to the top floor and demand to speak to Mr. Mitchell himself. But realistically, security would probably escort that person right out of the building. Elena's heart sank. That was exactly what she had feared. Unless, Rosa continued, tapping her finger thoughtfully against her chin, that person had some kind of proof, or knew someone who could get them 5 minutes with the big boss. She studied Elena's face carefully. This isn't really hypothetical, is it? Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message from her roommate, Sophia, a Ukrainian graduate student at UC San Diego. Check the news. Putin's puppet just got arrested in Kiev for embezzling millions. The corruption networks are finally being exposed. Elena's blood ran cold. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. Rosa, I need to ask you the biggest favor of my life, Elena said, grabbing Rosa's hands. I need you to help me get 5 minutes with Daniel Mitchell, today, right now. Rosa's expression shifted from amusement to concern. Elena, honey, what exactly did you overhear? For the next 10 minutes, Elena explained everything in rapid whispers, from the elevator conversation to her certainty that TechWave was about to fall victim to a massive fraud. Rosa listened with growing alarm, occasionally muttering prayers in Spanish under her breath. Dios mío, Rosa whispered when Elena finished. If you're right about this, but Elena, even if I could get you upstairs, why would Mr. Mitchell believe you? No offense, but we're invisible to people like him. Because I understand every word they said, and I can prove it, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. And because sometimes the people others don't notice are the ones who see everything. Rosa stared at her for a long moment, then stood up with the decisive energy of someone who had made up her mind. My cousin Javier works in executive security. He owes me a favor from when I helped his daughter get a job here. She pulled out her phone. But Elena, if this goes wrong, we could both lose our jobs. And if I do nothing, 3,000 people might lose theirs, Elena replied. 20 minutes later, Elena found herself in the most surreal situation of her life, standing outside Daniel Mitchell's corner office on the 30th floor, wearing her cleaning uniform and clutching a hastily written note in her trembling hands. The executive assistant, a perfectly groomed woman named Jennifer who looked like she had stepped out of a business magazine, was staring at Elena with barely concealed disdain. Let me understand this correctly, Jennifer said, her voice dripping with skepticism. You're a cleaning lady who claims to have urgent business information for Mr. Mitchell. Yes, ma'am, Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. It's about the meeting he's having right now with the Russian businessman. Jennifer's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose to dangerous heights. And you know about this meeting how, exactly? I overheard something that I think he needs to know. I see. Jennifer's smile was colder than a San Diego winter morning. Well, I'm afraid Mr. Mitchell is in an extremely important meeting and cannot be disturbed by, she gestured vaguely at Elena's uniform, operational staff concerns. Through the glass walls of the conference room adjacent to Daniel's office, Elena could see the meeting in progress. Daniel was leaning forward attentively as the tall Russian man gestured animatedly at a presentation on the large screen. Charts and graphs filled the display, showing projected profits and market expansion that Elena now knew were complete fabrications. Please, Elena said, her accent becoming more pronounced under stress. Just tell him that someone who speaks Russian has urgent information about his current meeting. 5 minutes, that's all I need. Jennifer's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with the kind of pity one might show to a delusional person. Honey, I don't know what you think you heard, but Mr. Mitchell employs teams of expert consultants and translators for international business. He doesn't need... She paused delicately. Help from the cleaning staff. Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and frustration. This was exactly what she had feared. In her cleaning uniform, with her accent and her immigrant status written all over her face, she was invisible. Worse than invisible. She was dismissed as irrelevant before she could even speak. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. Elena, darling, Sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected voices. The sunflower that grows in the shadow can still turn toward the light. "Miss Jennifer," Elena said, straightening her shoulders and switching to the authoritative tone she had once used to present business cases to professors in Kiev. "I understand your hesitation, but in approximately 15 minutes, your boss is about to sign a contract that will cost this company $80 million and 5 years of proprietary research. The men in that room are not who they claim to be, and I can prove it." Something in Elena's tone must have penetrated Jennifer's professional skepticism, because her expression shifted slightly. That's quite a serious accusation." "Yes, it is. And if I'm wrong, you can have security escort me out, and I'll never bother Mr. Mitchell again. But if I'm right..." Elena let the implications hang in the air. Jennifer glanced nervously at the conference room, where Daniel was now shaking hands with the Russian men. The meeting appeared to be wrapping up. I can't just interrupt his meeting based on..." Jennifer began, but Elena was already moving. "Then I'll interrupt it myself," Elena said. And before Jennifer could stop her, she strode toward the conference room doors. "Wait, you can't just..." Jennifer scrambled after her, but Elena was already knocking firmly on the glass door. Daniel Mitchell looked up with the annoyed expression of someone whose valuable time was being wasted by operational trivialities. When he saw Elena in her cleaning uniform, his frown deepened. He opened the door a crack. "Is there some kind of emergency?" he asked curtly. Elena took a deep breath and dove into the most important 30 seconds of her life. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Elena Kovalenko. I work in your building's cleaning staff, and I need to tell you that the men you're meeting with just spent 20 minutes in your elevator discussing how they're going to defraud your company of $80 million and steal your artificial intelligence algorithms." They spoke in Russian, assuming no one could understand them. They were wrong. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the air conditioning humming and the distant sound of traffic 30 floors below. Daniel stared at her for a moment, then glanced back at the 2 Russian men who were watching this exchange with expressions of polite curiosity mixed with growing alarm. When he looked back at Elena, his expression had shifted from annoyance to something that might have been amusement, if amusement could be this cold. "Miss," he paused, clearly having forgotten her name already. "Kovalenko," Elena supplied quietly. "Miss Kovalenko, I appreciate your concern for the company, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. These gentlemen are respected international partners, and this meeting involves highly confidential business matters that are frankly above your..." He gestured at her uniform. "Pay grade." Elena felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but she pressed on. "Sir, I have a master's degree in business administration from Kiev National Economic University. I understand exactly what kind of business you're discussing, and I'm telling you that these men are planning to disappear with your money the moment the transfer is complete." Daniel's expression hardened. "That's quite enough. Jennifer, please have security." "The tall one said the offshore accounts are ready," Elena interrupted desperately. "He called you a fool. He said that by the time you realize their revolutionary breakthrough is worthless, they'll be retiring in the Cayman Islands." For the first time, Daniel hesitated. Behind him, she could see the 2 Russian men exchanging glances that were no longer polite or curious. "You claim to speak Russian?" Daniel asked slowly. "Fluently," Elena replied, "along with Ukrainian, Polish, and obviously English." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, and Elena could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes. Finally, he stepped back and opened the conference room door wider. "Prove it," he said. The conference room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of San Diego traffic filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena could see Petco Park in the distance, where the Padres would be playing later that evening, but her focus was entirely on the 4 pairs of eyes staring at her, with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and what she was beginning to recognize as poorly concealed panic from the 2 Russian men. "Prove it," Daniel had said, and now Elena found herself in the most surreal job interview of her life. She looked directly at the tall Russian man with graying temples who was trying to maintain his composure but couldn't quite hide the nervous twitch that had developed at the corner of his left eye. «Вы думали, что никто не поймет ваш разговор в лифте?» Elena said in perfect Russian, her voice clear and confident. «You thought no one would understand your conversation in the elevator». The shorter Russian man visibly paled, his hand instinctively moving to loosen his tie. Elena continued, switching seamlessly between Russian and English for Daniel's benefit. «Вы сказали, дурак понятия не имеет, что его ждет. You said, the fool has no idea what's coming. Вы говорили об офшорных счетах и о том, как исчезнете с деньгами. You talked about offshore accounts and how you would disappear with the money». Daniel's expression had transformed completely. The dismissive skepticism was gone, replaced by sharp attention and growing alarm. «This is ridiculous», the tall Russian man said in heavily accented English, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. «This woman is clearly trying to sabotage legitimate business negotiations. Perhaps she works for competitors». Elena turned to face him directly. «Меня зовут Elena Kovalenko. Я из Kyiva», she said in Russian, then translated for Daniel. «My name is Elena Kovalenko, and I'm from Kiev. И я знаю, что вы не те, за кого себя выдаете. And I know you're not who you claim to be». She pulled out her phone and, with shaking fingers, opened the news article her roommate had sent earlier. «Mr. Mitchell, this morning there was breaking news from Ukraine. Authorities arrested a man named Viktor Petrov for embezzling millions through fake technology partnerships. The article mentions his associates, including," she scrolled down, «Dmitry Volkov and Sergei Kozlov». The color drained from the faces of both Russian men. Elena looked directly at the tall man. «You introduced yourself as Alexander Petrov, didn't you? Victor's brother, perhaps. And you," she turned to the shorter man, «I'm guessing you're either Dmitry or Sergei». The shorter man, apparently Sergei, made a sudden movement toward the door, but Daniel stepped smoothly into his path. «Nobody's leaving this room until I get some answers», Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. «Miss Kovalenko, you said they discussed specific amounts in the elevator». Elena nodded, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. $80 million initial transfer, plus your proprietary AI algorithms that took your team 5 years to develop. They plan to provide you with worthless code in return. Daniel pulled out his phone and pressed a number on speed dial. «Security. I need you to detain 2 individuals in conference room A immediately and get me legal on the line». «Wait!» Alexander, or whoever he really was, held up his hands. «There's been a misunderstanding. We are legitimate businessmen. This woman has clearly misheard. Then you won't mind if we verify your identities and check your references while we're all getting to know each other better», Daniel said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Within minutes, the conference room had filled with TechWave security personnel and what appeared to be half the legal department. Elena found herself pressed against the window, feeling simultaneously like a hero and an imposter, in her cleaning uniform, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits. Jennifer appeared at her elbow with a cup of coffee. I owe you an apology," she said quietly, "and probably a massive thank you." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. "You were just doing your job. I know how I must have looked. Like someone trying to save the company from an $80 million fraud." Daniel's voice came from directly behind her. Elena turned to find him standing closer than she had expected, his previous dismissiveness replaced by something that might have been respect. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a warm brown, and there were tiny laugh lines at the corners that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious expression indicated. "Miss Kovalenko," he said, "I owe you an apology, a significant one." "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Mitchell. I just did what anyone would do." Daniel shook his head. "No, actually, that's not true. Most people would have assumed it wasn't their problem. Most people would have figured that a CEO of a billion-dollar company probably has everything under control." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Most people wouldn't have risked their job to save a company owned by someone who treated them like they were invisible." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "You didn't treat me like I was invisible. You just didn't see me yet." Something flickered across Daniel's expression, surprise perhaps at her generous interpretation of his earlier dismissal. "The preliminary background checks are coming back," announced Sarah Chen, TechWave's head of legal, looking up from her laptop. Alexander Petrov is indeed Viktor Petrov's brother. Viktor was arrested this morning in Kiev for running a sophisticated international fraud ring targeting American tech companies. Alexander and his associate here are wanted for questioning in connection with at least 6 similar schemes across the United States. Holy shit, someone muttered, then immediately looked embarrassed for swearing in front of the CEO. Daniel turned back to Elena. You literally just saved this company from financial ruin. Do you understand that? Elena nodded slowly, the full magnitude of the situation finally sinking in. I think so. No, I don't think you do, Daniel said, his voice growing more animated. We were 15 minutes away from signing the initial agreement. The wire transfer was scheduled for this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, $80 million would have disappeared into offshore accounts, along with 5 years of research and development that represents the core of our next-generation AI platform. He gestured toward the window overlooking San Diego's bustling downtown. 3,000 employees, Ms. Kovalenko, pension funds, healthcare benefits, families depending on this company staying solvent. You didn't just save TechWave Corporation. You saved 3,000 livelihoods. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. 6 months ago, she had been presenting her master's thesis to professors in Kiev, dreaming of making a difference in the business world. Today, wearing a cleaning uniform in a San Diego skyscraper, she had done exactly that. There's something else, Sarah called out, still typing rapidly on her laptop. Miss Kovalenko, your background check is impressive. Summa cum laude from Kiev National Economic University. Dean's List every semester. Thesis on International Corporate Fraud Prevention Strategies. She looked up with raised eyebrows. Your thesis was literally about the exact type of scheme you just helped us avoid. The room fell silent. Elena was aware of every eye turning to stare at her, and suddenly she felt very small in her navy blue cleaning uniform. You have a master's degree in business administration, Daniel said slowly, and you've been cleaning our offices for 6 months. Elena lifted her chin, finding reserves of dignity she didn't know she possessed. Yes, sir. I've applied for over 200 business positions in San Diego. Apparently, American companies prefer candidates whose experience more closely matches their needs. The words hung in the air, and Elena could see several people in the room shift uncomfortably. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and she could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Miss Kovalenko, what are you doing for lunch today? Elena blinked, confused by the sudden change of subject. I usually eat a sandwich in Seaport Village and watch the boats in the harbor. Not today, Daniel said with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Today you're having lunch with me. We need to talk. As the security team escorted the 2 would-be fraudsters out of the conference room, Elena found herself wondering if her life had just changed completely, or if she was about to wake up from the most vivid dream she'd ever had. Through the window, the San Diego skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, and for the first time since arriving in America, Elena Kovalenko felt like she might actually belong here. But first, she had a lunch date with a CEO who was looking at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. Elena had never imagined that she would find herself sitting across from Daniel Mitchell at George's at the Cove in La Jolla, one of San Diego's most prestigious restaurants, still wearing her cleaning uniform while he sat comfortably in his tailored suit. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of La Jolla Cove, where seals basked on the rocky shores and surfers rode the Pacific swells beneath the afternoon sun. I should have gone home to change, Elena said, tugging self-consciously at her navy blue uniform shirt, as the hostess led them to a prime table overlooking the ocean. Why? Daniel asked, pulling out her chair with a gentlemanly gesture that surprised her. You're wearing the uniform of someone who just saved my company $80 million. I'd say that makes it the most expensive outfit in the restaurant. Despite her nervousness, Elena couldn't help but smile. Is that how business executives calculate fashion value? Only the smart ones, Daniel replied, and Elena caught a glimpse of humor in his warm brown eyes that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with residual adrenaline from the morning's drama. The waiter approached with the kind of deferential attention that Daniel clearly received everywhere he went. Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell. The usual table, I see. And may I say, the sea base is particularly excellent today. Thank you, Marcus, Daniel said, then turned to Elena. Have you been here before? Elena shook her head, trying not to gawk at the menu prices that represented more than she made in a week. I usually stick to the taco shops in Hillcrest. There's this place called Lolita's that makes incredible fish tacos for $3. I love Lolita's, Daniel said, surprising her again. Their carnitas are legendary. But today, lunch is on Tech Wave Corporation. Consider it a small token of our gratitude. As they ordered, Elena choosing the least expensive item she could find, despite Daniel's encouragement to get whatever looks good, she found herself studying his face. In the conference room, surrounded by lawyers and security personnel, he had been intimidating, authoritative, every inch the successful CEO. Here, with the ocean breeze ruffling his hair and genuine interest in his expression, he seemed more human. So, Daniel said once the waiter had left, Elena Kovalenko from Kiev, tell me your story. How does someone with a master's degree in business administration end up cleaning offices in San Diego? Elena had told this story so many times in job interviews that she had it rehearsed, but something about Daniel's direct gaze made her want to give him the real version, not the polished one. The simple answer is that my degree apparently doesn't translate well to American standards, she began, watching a pelican dive for fish in the cove below. The complicated answer is that 6 months ago, I had a choice between staying in Kiev and watching my country torn apart by war, or coming to America and starting over from zero. Daniel's expression grew serious. That must have been an impossible decision. Actually, it was the easiest decision I ever made, Elena said, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. My grandmother always told me that sunflowers turn toward the light, no matter how dark the soil around them. America represented light, even if it meant cleaning toilets instead of analyzing corporate strategies. But you kept applying for business positions? Elena nodded. 217 applications to be exact. I got very good at writing cover letters explaining why my foreign education was actually valuable. Most companies never responded. The ones that did were very polite about preferring candidates whose experience more closely matched their needs. Daniel winced. Which is corporate speak for, we don't trust someone who sounds like she just stepped off the boat from Eastern Europe, Elena finished matter-of-factly. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly. That's not the America we like to think we are. But it's the America that exists, Elena replied, and honestly, I understand it. If I were hiring someone for a position requiring cultural fluency and communication skills, I might make the same choice. The difference is that I would at least give them a chance to prove themselves. Their food arrived, and for a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the sandstone cliffs of La Jolla Cove. Elena had ordered the simplest fish dish on the menu, but it was prepared with a sophistication that made her close her eyes in appreciation. This is incredible, she murmured. Wait until you try the dessert, Daniel said. They have this chocolate souffle that's basically edible heaven. Oh, I couldn't, Elena protested. This lunch probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. Daniel set down his fork and looked at her seriously. Elena, I want to offer you a job. Elena nearly choked on her bite of fish. Excuse me. A real job. In our International Business Development Department. You speak 4 languages, you have a master's degree in exactly the field we need expertise in, and you've already proven that you can spot problems other people miss. He leaned forward, his enthusiasm evident. Plus, your thesis was on corporate fraud prevention. Do you have any idea how valuable that expertise is in today's market? Elena stared at him, her heart racing. You're serious? Completely serious. Starting salary would be $90,000, plus benefits, plus a signing bonus to thank you for what you did today. Elena's hands started shaking. $90,000 was more money than she had ever imagined making in America. It was enough to move out of her tiny studio apartment, enough to bring her younger sister over from Ukraine, enough to finally feel like she belonged in this new country. But something held her back. Why? She asked quietly. Daniel looked confused. Why what? Why are you offering me this job? Is it because I'm qualified or because you feel guilty about how you treated me this morning? The question hung between them like a challenge. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the same careful attention he probably gave to million-dollar business decisions. If I'm being completely honest, he said finally, it's both. Yes, I feel terrible about dismissing you the way I did. But Elena, guilt doesn't make me offer someone a $90,000 position. Your qualifications do that. Your intelligence does that. The fact that you saw a problem, took enormous personal risk to solve it, and handled yourself with grace under pressure, that's what makes me want you on my team. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I've dreamed of hearing words like that since I arrived in America. Then say yes, Daniel said simply. Elena looked out at the Pacific Ocean, where the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. 6 months ago, she had crossed this same ocean carrying nothing but hope and determination. This morning, she had been invisible, just another immigrant doing the jobs Americans didn't want to do. Now a man she barely knew was offering her the chance to build the life she had dreamed of. There's something you should know about me, she said slowly. I don't just turn toward the light. I fight for it. If you hire me, I'm going to work harder than anyone else in that building. I'm going to ask difficult questions, challenge assumptions, and probably annoy people who are comfortable with the way things have always been done. Daniel's smile was the first completely unguarded expression she had seen from him. Elena, I'm counting on it. She took a deep breath, tasting salt air and possibility. In that case, Mr. Mitchell, I accept your offer. Daniel, he corrected. If we're going to be colleagues, you should call me Daniel. Daniel, Elena repeated, testing the name. It felt strange and wonderful to say it without the formal distance of Mr. Mitchell. As if sensing the significance of the moment, their waiter appeared with champagne. Compliments of the house, he said with a knowing smile. Mr. Mitchell, the staff couldn't help but notice you seemed to be celebrating something special. Daniel raised his glass. To Elena Kovalenko, TechWave's newest international business development specialist, and to the power of listening to voices that others overlook. Elena raised her glass, her hand still trembling slightly. To second chances and new beginnings. As their glasses touched with a delicate chime, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't just gratitude or relief or professional satisfaction. It was something warmer, more complicated, more dangerous. It was the beginning of falling in love with a man who had just changed her life completely. But as the champagne bubbles tickled her nose and Daniel's eyes met hers across the table, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much more complicated story. After all, she had learned enough about American business culture to know that office romances were fraught with complications, especially between a CEO and his newest employee. And she still had no idea that Daniel Mitchell was asking himself the exact same question. What do you do when the woman who saves your company also steals your heart? The sun continued its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And Elena Kovalenko began the first day of her new life in America. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her new apartment in Mission Hills, adjusting the collar of her crisp white blouse and navy blazer. The apartment was still mostly empty. She had splurged on a bed, a small dining table, and a coffee maker, but the walls remained bare and the living room echoed with the hollowness of new beginnings. Through her window, she could see the San Diego Zoo's famous skyferry gondolas gliding silently through the treetops of Balboa Park, and the sight never failed to remind her that she was living in what most people considered paradise. Today was her first official day as International Business Development Specialist at TechWave Corporation, and she was more nervous than she had been since her thesis defense in Kiev. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, her roommate turned best friend. Remember, you're not just the cleaning lady who got lucky. You're the badass Ukrainian who saved $1 billion company. Own it. Elena smiled, pocketing her phone as she grabbed her new leather briefcase, a gift to herself that had cost more than she used to make in 2 weeks, but felt like a tangible symbol of her transformation. The TechWave building looked different when you entered through the front doors as an employee rather than through the service entrance. The marble lobby gleamed under the morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Elena felt a thrill of ownership as her new employee badge granted her access to the executive elevator. The International Business Development Department occupied half of the 25th floor, with a spectacular view of San Diego Bay and the Coronado Bridge. Elena's new office, she had an office, was modest but professional, with a desk that faced the window and enough space for the framed photo of her grandmother that she had carefully transported from Kiev. "So you're the famous Elena Kovalenko," came a voice from her doorway. Elena turned to see a woman about her age with perfectly styled auburn hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire new wardrobe. "I'm Rebecca Hartford," the woman continued, extending a manicured hand. "Senior International Business Development Manager. I guess that makes me your supervisor." Elena shook her hand, noting the slightly too firm grip that seemed designed to establish dominance. "It's nice to meet you, Rebecca. I'm looking forward to working with the team." Rebecca's smile became more genuine, but not necessarily warmer. "Yes, well, it's certainly unusual to have someone join our department straight from—" she paused delicately. "Operational services, but Daniel speaks very highly of your potential." The way she said Daniel's name, familiar, possessive, made something twist uncomfortably in Elena's stomach. "Have you worked with Mr. Mitchell long?" "Daniel and I have a history," Rebecca said with a knowing look. "We went to Stanford together, and I've been here since he started the company. We've always had a close working relationship." Before Elena could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Rebecca, are you monopolizing our newest team member?" Elena turned to see a friendly-looking man in his 40s with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. Unlike Rebecca's calculated warmth, his smile was immediately genuine. "Elena, I'm Tom Bradley, head of the International Division. Welcome to the team." He shook her hand with the comfortable confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "I've heard incredible things about how you saved our collective bacon a few weeks ago." "It was just lucky timing," Elena said modestly. "Lucky timing and the ability to speak 4 languages fluently and recognize corporate fraud when you hear it," Tom corrected with a grin. "Don't sell yourself short." "That's not the Ukrainian way, is it?" Elena felt herself relax for the first time since entering the building. "Actually, the Ukrainian way is to work twice as hard as everyone else and then apologize for not doing enough." Tom laughed. "Well, you'll fit right in here then. Rebecca, why don't you show Elena around and introduce her to the rest of the team? I want her up to speed on the Nakamura electronics proposal by the end of the week." As Tom walked away, Rebecca's expression shifted back to professional courtesy, with an undercurrent of something less friendly. "Right then," she said crisply. "Let's get you oriented." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of introductions, system passwords, and briefings on current projects. Elena met the rest of the international team, 6 other specialists who seemed genuinely welcoming, despite obvious curiosity about her unusual path to the department. She learned about TechWave's expansion into Asian markets, their partnerships with European firms, and the complex regulatory landscape of international technology transfer. It was exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing, and Elena felt her confidence growing with each conversation. "And this," Rebecca said, stopping in front of a glass-walled conference room, "is where we hold our weekly strategy meetings with Daniel. He likes to stay closely involved with international projects." Through the glass, Elena could see Daniel himself, deep in conversation with several executives she didn't recognize. He was wearing a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and his expression was focused and intense as he gestured at charts displayed on the room's massive screen. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and made eye contact through the glass. His serious expression transformed into a warm smile, and he raised his hand in a small wave. Elena felt her cheeks warm as she waved back, acutely aware of Rebecca watching this exchange with sharp interest. "You know," Rebecca said casually, "Daniel has a tendency to take personal interest in his employees' success, especially employees who've done something dramatic to help the company. But it's important to maintain professional boundaries. Corporate relationships can get—" Complicated. Elena turned to look at Rebecca directly. Are you giving me advice or a warning? Rebecca's smile was razor-sharp. In my experience, there's not always a difference between the two. Before Elena could respond, the conference room door opened and Daniel emerged, still surrounded by his executive team. Elena, he said, his face lighting up as he approached, how's your first morning going? Very well, thank you. Everyone has been incredibly welcoming. I'm glad to hear it. Daniel glanced at Rebecca with a polite nod. Rebecca, thanks for showing Elena around. I was hoping to steal her for a few minutes to discuss the Morrison Industries file. Of course, Rebecca replied smoothly. Elena, we'll continue the orientation after lunch. As Rebecca walked away, Daniel's expression became more relaxed. How are you really doing? I know this must feel like drinking from a fire hose. Elena appreciated his genuine concern. It's overwhelming but exciting. This is exactly the kind of work I hoped to do when I came to America. Good. I have something I want to show you. Daniel gestured toward his office. Do you have a few minutes? Elena followed him to the executive floor, trying not to think about Rebecca's warnings about corporate relationships and professional boundaries. Daniel's office was spacious and understated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of San Diego's skyline. The walls were decorated with what appeared to be original artwork, and a comfortable seating area was arranged around a coffee table stacked with business magazines. Coffee? Daniel asked, moving toward an expensive-looking espresso machine. Please, Elena said, settling into one of the leather chairs and trying to look like she belonged there. So, Daniel said as he prepared their coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who clearly valued good espresso, I wanted to talk to you about a special project. Are you familiar with Nortech Solutions in Stockholm? Elena's pulse quickened. Nortech was one of Europe's leading artificial intelligence companies, and their potential partnership with an American firm had been widely discussed in the international business press. They've reached out about a potential collaboration, Daniel continued, handing her a perfectly prepared cappuccino. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also incredibly complex. There are regulatory issues, cultural considerations, and about 15 different ways it could go wrong if we don't handle it perfectly. Elena sipped her coffee, noting absently that it was the best cappuccino she'd had since leaving Europe. What kind of collaboration are they proposing? Joint development of next-generation AI algorithms for European markets, with shared intellectual property rights and coordinated product launches across both continents. Daniel sat down across from her, his expression serious. It's exactly the kind of deal that could position TechWave as a truly global company, or it could become a regulatory nightmare that destroys both partnerships and products. Elena felt her excitement building. This was the kind of high-stakes international business strategy she had studied in Kiev, the kind of challenge that required cultural fluency, regulatory expertise, and the ability to navigate complex relationships across multiple countries. You want me to work on this project? She asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of her voice. I want you to lead this project, Daniel corrected. You understand European business culture in a way that none of our other specialists do. You've studied international corporate partnerships extensively, and frankly, after what happened with the Russian situation, I trust your instincts about people and their motivations. Elena set down her coffee cup with a trembling hand. Lead a project of this magnitude? 2 weeks ago, she had been cleaning toilets. Now Daniel was offering her the chance to spearhead TechWave's most important international expansion. Daniel, I'm honored by your confidence in me, but are you sure? This is an enormous responsibility, and I've been here exactly 4 hours. Elena, Daniel said, leaning forward with an intensity that made her heart skip. I've been in business for 15 years. I've learned to recognize talent when I see it, regardless of what package it comes in. You have something that can't be taught, the ability to see what others miss and the courage to act on what you see. Elena felt herself being drawn into his orbit, the same way she had been during their lunch at La Jolla Cove. There was something magnetic about Daniel's confidence, his vision, his apparent belief in her potential. Besides, Daniel added with a smile that made her stomach flutter, I'll be working closely with you on this project. Consider me your safety net while you learn to fly." Elena took a deep breath, tasting possibility and risk in equal measure. "In that case, Daniel, I accept." As their eyes met across the coffee table, Elena felt the same dangerous electricity she had experienced at lunch. Working closely with Daniel Mitchell was going to test every professional boundary she had ever established. But as she looked out at the San Diego skyline, where the afternoon sun was beginning to paint the buildings in shades of gold, Elena Kovalenko decided that some risks were worth taking. After all, she hadn't crossed an ocean to play it safe. 3 weeks into the Nortec project, Elena was working late again in her office on the 25th floor, surrounded by regulatory documents, cultural analysis reports, and empty coffee cups that testified to another 14-hour day. The San Diego skyline twinkled below her window, and she could see the lights of Coronado Island reflecting off the dark waters of the bay. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the building was almost empty, except for security guards and the occasional workaholic executive. Elena rubbed her tired eyes and reached for her phone to call an Uber home when she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. "I thought I might find you here," Daniel's voice came from her doorway. Elena looked up to see him leaning against the frame, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking as tired as she felt, but somehow still managing to be devastatingly handsome in the dim office lighting. "Daniel, what are you still doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," he replied, stepping into her office and closing the door behind him. "It's past 10 o'clock, Elena. Even workaholic Ukrainian business executives need sleep occasionally." Elena gestured at the papers covering her desk. "The Stockholm team wants to have a video conference tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. their time, which means I need to have the regulatory compliance analysis finished by midnight our time. Plus, Rebecca has been—" She paused, not wanting to sound like she was complaining. "Rebecca has been what?" Daniel's tone sharpened with concern. Elena sighed, too tired to maintain diplomatic language. "She's been questioning every decision I make, double-checking my work with the legal department, and somehow managing to schedule meetings that conflict with every call I try to have with the Nortec team. This morning she told Tom that she's concerned about the project timeline, and suggested that perhaps someone with more experience should take over the lead role." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Rebecca said that?" "She's not wrong," Elena added quickly. "I am new to this. Maybe she's just being thorough." "Elena," Daniel said, moving to sit on the edge of her desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Rebecca Hartford is many things, but thorough in the interests of company success is not one of them. She's territorial, competitive, and she doesn't like being shown up by someone who was cleaning toilets 3 weeks ago." Elena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Is that what people are saying? That I'm showing off?" "No," Daniel said firmly, reaching out to touch her hand where it rested on her computer mouse. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. "People are saying that you're brilliant, dedicated, and that you understand international business in ways that the rest of us are still learning. Rebecca is threatened by that." Elena stared down at their joined hands, her heart racing from more than just caffeine and exhaustion. Daniel's thumb was tracing small circles on her knuckles, and she found herself wondering what would happen if she turned her hand over and interlaced their fingers. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we should talk about this." "About Rebecca's professional jealousy?" "About this," Elena said, gesturing between them. "About the fact that every time you walk into a room, my heart starts racing. About the fact that I look forward to our project meetings more than I should. About the fact that I'm falling for my boss, which is probably the most unprofessional thing I could possibly do." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying. Elena immediately wanted to take them back, to pretend she had never been brave enough to voice what had been building between them for weeks. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still moving across her knuckles, in a way that was making it difficult for her to think clearly. "Elena," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, "I've been trying to convince myself that what I'm feeling is just gratitude, or professional admiration, or some kind of CEO savior complex." Elena looked up at him, her green eyes meeting his brown ones in the dim office lighting. But the truth is, Daniel continued, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that first day in the elevator. Not as my employee, not as the woman who saved my company, but as the most intriguing, brave, beautiful person I've ever met. Elena felt her breath catch. Daniel. I know it's complicated, he said, sliding off the desk to kneel beside her chair, bringing his face level with hers. I know there are power dynamics and professional considerations, and probably a dozen HR policies that say this is a terrible idea. It is a terrible idea, Elena whispered, but she made no move to pull her hand away from his. The worst, Daniel agreed, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. You could lose your job. I could lose my company's respect. Rebecca could make both our lives miserable. Those are all very good reasons to stop this conversation right now, Elena said, her voice barely audible. They are, Daniel said, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone. Can you think of any reasons not to stop? Elena's logical mind was screaming warnings, but her heart was drowning out every rational thought. Because I've never felt like this about anyone before, she admitted. Because when you look at me, I feel like the person I always wanted to be. Because I'm tired of being careful and practical and invisible. Daniel's smile was soft and wondering. Elena Kovalenko, you could never be invisible. Not to me. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to remember all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, Elena found herself closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Elena's free hand came up to tangle in his hair, the kiss deepened into something that tasted like possibility and risk, and the kind of passion that changed everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. This changes everything, she whispered. I know, Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. We can't let it affect the project, or the company, or... Elena, Daniel interrupted gently, we'll figure it out, all of it. But right now, can we just... He was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside Elena's office. They sprang apart, just as the door opened without a knock. Rebecca Hartford stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. Oh, she said, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I was just coming back to get my laptop and I saw the lights on. Daniel, I didn't expect to find you here so late. Elena felt her face burning with embarrassment and the certainty that Rebecca had seen more than she was letting on. Elena was working late on the Nortec analysis, Daniel said smoothly, standing and straightening his tie. I was just checking on her progress. How dedicated, Rebecca said, her eyes moving between them with obvious suspicion. Elena, you really should get some rest. We wouldn't want exhaustion to affect your judgment on such an important project. The implied threat was clear. I know what I saw, and I can use it against you. You're right, Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I was just finishing up. Wonderful, Rebecca said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel, walk me to my car. I have some concerns about the Morrison Industries contract that I'd like to discuss. Elena watched as Rebecca effectively maneuvered Daniel away from her office, chattering about business matters with the possessive familiarity of someone who had known him for years. After they left, Elena slumped back in her chair, her heart still racing from the kiss and the near disaster of being discovered. She looked at her computer screen, where the regulatory analysis sat half-finished, and realized that her carefully planned new life in America had just become infinitely more complicated. Outside her window, the lights of San Diego continued to twinkle like stars, beautiful and distant. Elena touched her lips, still tingling from Daniel's kiss, and wondered if she had just made the best decision or the worst mistake of her life. One thing was certain, Rebecca Hartford now held information that could destroy everything Elena had worked for, and based on the calculating look in her eyes, she wasn't going to hesitate to use it. Elena turned back to her computer and began typing, but her mind was no longer on Swedish regulatory requirements. Instead, she was thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her, the way her name sounded in his voice, and the dangerous game they had just started playing. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of waves against the shore, and she thought of her grandmother's sunflowers, always turning toward the light even when storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Some storms, Elena decided, were worth weathering for the chance to bloom. The crisis hit at 6:47 a.m. on a foggy Thursday morning, just as Elena was walking through Balboa Park with her first cup of coffee, trying to clear her head before another complicated day of pretending that nothing had changed between her and Daniel. Her phone rang with the aggressive tone she had assigned to work emergencies. "Elena, thank God you're awake," came Tom Bradley's voice, tight with stress. "We have a problem, a big one." Elena immediately stopped walking, her stomach dropping. "What's wrong?" "The Nortec deal is falling apart. Lars Eriksson just called me from Stockholm. Apparently they received some concerning information about TechWave's corporate culture and professional standards. They're threatening to pull out of the entire partnership." Elena's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, splashing across the park's walkway. "What kind of concerning information?" "They wouldn't give me specifics, but Lars mentioned something about inappropriate relationships between management and staff and questions about our company's commitment to professional integrity." Tom's voice was grim. "Elena, this deal represents 18 months of work and potentially $300 million in revenue. If we lose it..." Elena didn't need him to finish. The Nortec partnership was supposed to be TechWave's entry into the European market. Without it, the company would face significant layoffs and possible restructuring. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Elena said, already turning back toward the street to hail a cab. "Elena," Tom said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything about your working relationship with Daniel that the Swedish team might have heard about?" Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her grandmother's disapproval across 5,000 miles. Tom, I think we should discuss this in person." "I was afraid you'd say that." When Elena arrived at TechWave, the executive floor was buzzing with crisis-mode energy. She could see Daniel through his office window, pacing while speaking rapidly into his phone, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Rebecca was holding court in the main conference room, surrounded by legal staff and looking remarkably composed for someone whose company was facing a potential $300 million disaster. "Elena," Rebecca called out with false brightness as Elena passed the conference room. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the Nortec situation." Elena stepped into the conference room, immediately sensing the hostile undertones beneath the professional urgency. "What exactly did the Swedish team tell you?" Elena asked Tom directly. Before Tom could answer, Rebecca spoke up. "Apparently someone contacted Lars Eriksson personally with concerns about the leadership of our Nortec team. They suggested that personal relationships might be compromising professional judgment and that TechWave's commitment to the project might be divided." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Rebecca wasn't even trying to hide her involvement anymore. "Rebecca," Tom said slowly, "do you know who might have contacted the Swedish team with these concerns?" Rebecca's smile was all innocence. "I have no idea, Tom, but honestly, it's not entirely surprising. When personal and professional boundaries become blurred, it creates exactly this kind of risk for the company." Elena found her voice. "Are you suggesting that someone deliberately sabotaged this deal?" "I'm suggesting," Rebecca replied with steel in her voice, "that actions have consequences. When senior management shows favoritism towards certain employees, it creates the appearance of impropriety. International partners notice these things." The room fell silent except for the sound of Elena's heart pounding in her ears. She looked around the table at faces that ranged from confused to suspicious to openly hostile. "Where's Daniel?" Elena asked quietly. "On a call with the board of directors," Tom replied grimly. "They're not happy." Through the conference room's glass wall, Elena could see Daniel's office door opening. He emerged looking haggard, his face the color of San Diego fog. When his eyes met hers across the floor, she saw something that made her heart break. Doubt. Daniel approached the conference room with the slow gait of a man walking to his own execution. "What's our status?" he asked as he entered, his voice carefully neutral. Lars is flying in tomorrow for an emergency meeting, Tom reported. He wants to discuss TechWave's corporate governance standards before proceeding with any partnership agreements. Daniel nodded grimly. And the board? They want answers, Tom said simply. They want to know how an 18-month negotiation fell apart overnight, and they want to know if there are any internal factors that might have contributed to the situation. Elena watched Daniel's jaw tighten. She could see him making calculations, weighing options, preparing to sacrifice whatever was necessary to save his company. Tom, Daniel said finally, I think we need to discuss reassigning the Nortech project leadership. Elena felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Daniel, you can't. It's not personal, Elena, Daniel said, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. It's about what's best for the company. What's best for 3,000 employees who depend on TechWave's success. Of course it's not personal, Rebecca said smoothly. It's simply good business practice to ensure that our international partners have complete confidence in our team's professionalism. Elena looked around the room at faces that had been friendly just days before and now regarded her with suspicion and calculation. She was no longer Elena Kovalenko, the brilliant analyst who had saved the company from fraud. She was now Elena Kovalenko, the potential liability who might have cost them $300 million. I see, Elena said quietly. And who would you suggest to lead the project in my place? Rebecca's smile was triumphant. Well, I do have extensive experience with European partnerships. Elena felt something inside her snap. All the months of rejection letters, all the nights of studying English business terminology, all the careful navigation of American corporate culture, and it was going to end like this, with her being pushed aside because she had been foolish enough to fall in love with her boss. But then she remembered something her grandmother had taught her about sunflowers. They don't just turn toward the light, they follow it across the entire sky, no matter how many obstacles try to block their path. Before we make any final decisions, Elena said, standing up and straightening her shoulders, I'd like to make a proposal. Tom looked surprised. Elena, I'm not sure this is the time. This is exactly the time, Elena interrupted, finding her voice and her courage. Rebecca, you contacted Lars Eriksson, didn't you? You told him about seeing Daniel in my office last night. Rebecca's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course you don't, Elena said. Just like you had no idea why my meetings with the Stockholm team kept getting interrupted by conflicting schedules. Just like you had no idea why my regulatory reports kept getting lost in the legal department. Elena, Daniel said quietly, what are you doing? Elena turned to face him directly. I'm fighting for what I believe in. Daniel, you gave me this project because you trusted my instincts. Well, my instincts are telling me that Lars Eriksson is a smart businessman who cares more about results than office gossip, and the results speak for themselves. She moved to the conference room's presentation screen and pulled up her laptop. These are the preliminary agreements I finalized with the Nortech team 2 days ago, she said, clicking through detailed charts and contract terms. Revenue projections exceed our initial estimates by 30%. Regulatory compliance is ahead of schedule. The Stockholm team has expressed enthusiasm about every aspect of our proposal. Elena looked directly at Rebecca. Do you really think Lars Eriksson is going to throw away a $300 million partnership because someone whispered rumors about office romance? Elena, Tom began, but she continued. No, Tom. Lars is flying here tomorrow because he's a thorough businessman who wants to meet face-to-face with the team that's going to make his company hundreds of millions of dollars. The question is, are we going to meet him with confidence in our work, or are we going to hand him exactly the kind of internal drama and uncertainty that would actually make him question our professionalism? Elena clicked to her final slide, a comprehensive timeline showing the project's success metrics alongside every instance of Rebecca's interference. Rebecca, you want this project because you want to prove that you're indispensable, Elena said. But I want this project because I believe in it, because I've spent 18-hour days making sure every detail is perfect, because the Swedish team trusts me to deliver what I promised them. The room was completely silent. Elena could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. So here's my proposal, Elena continued. Let me meet with Lars tomorrow. Let me present the work I've done. Let me prove that TechWave's commitment to this partnership has nothing to do with office politics and everything to do with delivering exceptional results. She looked around the room, meeting every skeptical gaze. If I can't convince Lars to proceed with the partnership exactly as planned, I'll resign. You'll never have to worry about my unprofessional conduct again. Elena finally looked at Daniel, whose expression was unreadable. But if I can save this deal, she said softly, then we stop pretending that my personal life has anything to do with my professional competence. The silence stretched on until Tom cleared his throat. That's actually not a terrible idea, he said slowly. Elena, you know this project better than anyone. If Lars is coming here to evaluate our team's capabilities, you're our best chance of convincing him. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Tom, you can't be serious. The risk, Daniel said suddenly, speaking for the first time in several minutes, is exactly the same whether Elena leads the meeting or not. If we've lost the partnership, we've lost it. But if there's a chance to save it... He looked at Elena with something that might have been admiration. Elena, are you sure about this? If tomorrow doesn't go well, then I'll pack my desk and be gone by Monday, Elena said simply. But Daniel, I didn't come to America to play it safe. I came here to prove that I belong. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing her words against the advice of every board member who had probably told him to distance himself from the scandal. Finally, he nodded. All right, Elena. You have until tomorrow afternoon to save a $300 million partnership. His smile was small but genuine. No pressure. As the meeting dispersed, Elena remained in the conference room staring out at the San Diego skyline. Tomorrow she would either secure her place in American business or find herself back where she started, a Ukrainian immigrant with impressive credentials and no opportunities. But for the first time since arriving in America, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, fighting for something she believed in, with everything she had to lose. Outside the window, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing the bright California sun that had drawn dreamers to this coast for generations. Elena Kovalenko had one day to prove that she was more than just another dreamer. She intended to make it count. Elena arrived at TechWave at dawn on Friday morning, carrying a thermos of strong Ukrainian coffee and wearing her best suit, the midnight blue one she had bought for job interviews that had never led anywhere. Today felt different, though. Today felt like the culmination of every dream she had carried across the Atlantic Ocean. The fog was rolling in from the Pacific, shrouding downtown San Diego in a gray embrace that reminded her of Kiev mornings. Through her office window, she could see the early joggers making their way through Balboa Park, and the sight filled her with unexpected calm. Win or lose, she had found her voice in America. At exactly 2:00 p.m., Lars Eriksson arrived at TechWave Corporation. Elena had researched everything about him. 52 years old, CEO of Nortech Solutions for 8 years, known for his directness and his brilliant business instincts. He was tall and blonde, with the kind of Scandinavian reserve that could be mistaken for coldness, but was actually careful consideration. Miss Kovalenko, Lars said as they shook hands in the executive conference room, I understand you are the architect of this proposed partnership. I am, Elena replied in perfect English, then added in fluent Swedish, and I'm honored to finally meet you in person, Mr. Eriksson. Lars's eyebrows rose in surprise. You speak Swedish? I speak 6 languages, actually, Elena said with a smile. I find it helps in international business. Around the conference table sat Daniel, Tom, Rebecca, and several other TechWave executives. Elena could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. Before we begin, Lars said, settling into his chair, I should address the concerns that were brought to my attention yesterday. I received a phone call suggesting that there might be personal complications affecting this project's leadership. Elena's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Eriksson, may I ask what specific concerns were raised? Lars glanced around the table. The caller suggested that romantic relationships between management and staff might compromise the project's integrity. Elena nodded calmly. That's a fair concern for any international partnership. May I show you why I believe it's irrelevant to our business relationship? Without waiting for an answer, Elena activated the room's presentation system. Her first slide showed the Nortec project timeline, with key milestones highlighted in green. Every deadline met or exceeded, she said. Every regulatory requirement fulfilled ahead of schedule. Every technical specification not just satisfied, but improved upon. She clicked to the next slide, detailed financial projections. Revenue estimates that exceed both companies' initial expectations by 32%, with implementation costs coming in 15% under budget. Lars leaned forward, his business instincts clearly engaged. Elena's next slide showed testimonials from the Nortec technical team. These are quotes from your own engineers, Mr. Eriksson. They describe our collaboration as exceptionally professional, technically superior, and the gold standard for international partnerships. She looked directly at Lars. Mr. Eriksson, in my experience, results speak louder than gossip. Would you like to review those results in detail? For the next 45 minutes, Elena walked Lars through every aspect of the partnership proposal. She answered his technical questions in Swedish, his regulatory concerns in English, and his cultural queries with the kind of nuanced understanding that only came from living between worlds. She showed him market analysis that revealed opportunities neither company had initially considered. She presented contingency plans for every possible complication. She demonstrated not just competence, but the kind of visionary thinking that transformed good business deals into legendary ones. Remarkable, Lars said finally, sitting back in his chair. Miss Kovalenko, this is exactly the kind of comprehensive partnership framework that Nortec hoped to find in the American market. Elena felt relief flooding through her, but she wasn't finished yet. Mr. Eriksson, there's one more thing I'd like to address. She looked around the conference table, her gaze finally settling on Rebecca. The phone call you received yesterday was made by someone who was attempting to sabotage this partnership for personal reasons. Rebecca's face went pale. Elena, that's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation, Elena replied calmly. She clicked to her final slide. A detailed timeline showing every instance of interference with the Nortec project. These are documented attempts to undermine my work, delay communications with your team, and create the appearance of unprofessionalism. Lars studied the timeline with growing interest. This is comprehensive. I believe in thorough documentation, Elena said. Mr. Eriksson, I won't lie to you. There are personal relationships at TechWave that some people consider complicated. But I've learned that in business, what matters is not whether people are perfect, but whether they can deliver exceptional results despite imperfection. She looked at Daniel, who was watching her with undisguised admiration. This partnership will succeed because both companies are committed to excellence, not because the people involved are immune to human emotions. Lars was quiet for a long moment, then he began to chuckle. Miss Kovalenko, in 25 years of international business, I have never seen anyone address corporate politics with such direct honesty. Elena held her breath. I like it, Lars continued, and frankly, the results you've presented speak for themselves. The caller yesterday seemed more interested in spreading gossip than discussing business substance. I should have trusted my initial instincts about this partnership. He stood up and extended his hand to Elena. Miss Kovalenko, on behalf of Nortec Solutions, I'm pleased to confirm our commitment to this partnership. When can we schedule the formal signing ceremony? The conference room erupted in relief and congratulations. Elena shook Lars's hand, feeling like she was finally truly home. As the meeting dispersed and various executives made plans for the partnership launch, Elena found herself alone with Daniel in the conference room. Elena, he began, but she held up her hand. Daniel, before you say anything, I need you to know something. She took a deep breath. I didn't fight for this project to save my job or to prove a point about office romance. I fought for it because I believe in what we can accomplish together, as business partners, as innovators, and yes, as people who care about each other. Daniel moved closer, his expression soft. Elena, I'm not finished, she said with a smile. I also need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Not because of Rebecca's politics, not because of board pressure, and not because love is complicated. I've spent my whole life running toward challenges, and you, Daniel Mitchell, are the most wonderful challenge I've ever encountered." Daniel's smile was brilliant. "In that case, Elena Kovalenko, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as CEO and employee, not as business partners, but as a man who is completely, hopelessly in love with the most extraordinary woman he's ever met." Elena felt her heart soar. "I thought you'd never ask." As they left the conference room together, Elena saw Rebecca clearing out her desk. Tom was standing nearby with what appeared to be a termination letter. "Sabotaging company partnerships crosses a line," Tom explained quietly when he noticed Elena watching. The board was not amused. Elena felt a moment of sympathy for Rebecca, but it was quickly replaced by satisfaction. Some battles were worth fighting, and some victories were worth celebrating. That evening, Elena and Daniel walked hand in hand along the cliffs of Sunset Cliffs, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, painting the sky like a masterpiece. "So," Daniel said, pulling Elena closer as they watched surfers riding the evening waves, "what's next for the Ukrainian heart of San Diego?" Elena smiled, thinking of her grandmother's sunflowers and the long journey that had brought her to this moment. "Next, I think we build something beautiful together. In business, in life, and in love." "I like the sound of that," Daniel said, and kissed her as the sun disappeared into the Pacific, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of everything else. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same conference room where she had nearly lost everything, now serving as TechWave's Vice President of International Development. The Nortec partnership had exceeded every projection, and TechWave was expanding into markets across Europe and Asia. On her desk sat a framed photo of her grandmother's sunflower field in Ukraine, next to another photo from her wedding to Daniel on the beach at La Jolla Cove. Both images reminded her daily that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the most unexpected soil. Outside her window, San Diego sparkled in the California sunshine, a city of dreamers and immigrants and second chances. Elena had found all three here, along with something she had never dared to hope for: a love that celebrated both her strength and her vulnerability, her past and her future, her Ukrainian heart and her American dreams. After all, the best partnerships, in business and in life, were built not on perfection, but on the courage to grow toward the light together, no matter what obstacles stood in the way. Elena Kovalenko had crossed an ocean to find her place in the world. What she discovered was that home wasn't a location on a map. It was the feeling of being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are. And in San Diego, with Daniel's hand in hers and endless possibilities stretching out before them like the Pacific horizon, Elena had finally found her way home.